Good afternoon. This is Chuck Trice, and this is Investment Tuesday. And welcome to the show. I'm glad you can be here. And you can see I've got on the screen there the little road sign that says trade and exchange and owner carry and owner finance. And we can just sell the property. So we can do all of that. We can trade or exchange and buy and sell, and we use other assets plus cash to be able to make a transaction happen. Today, we're going to talk about net operating income. Now, you see the little thing on the screen that says 300 ways to buy and sell real estate, and truly, there's at least 300 and maybe more. And I've got a book that's put out by Bob Steele, Steele, and you can find that on Amazon.com. And that gives over 300 ways to buy and sell real estate. So today we're going to talk about net operating income. There's an APOD sheet. I guess people have probably heard of that short term. APOD stands for Annual Property Operating Data Sheet. And when we go to buy and sell real estate, one thing that we can gloss over very easily is the income and the expenses. Now, if you got a new property, then you have to use projected income, potential income. But if you've got a property, an investment property that's been generating income for years, unless it's in a really rundown shape and you're trying to show what the potential of the property would be, then you would use potential income. But first, to present to the group, present to exchangers and people that are familiar with operating statements, I would present the actual income and expenses. There's just nothing worse, hardly. There's a lot of things worse, but when you are dealing with potential income, you're relying on somebody else's idea of what the income could be. And so that's just not good. And so I see that Dr. Ed has joined us in the broadcast, and he's putting in his earbuds. And so I will wait till he does that before I add him to the show. So we're going to deal today about net operating income, and that's called NOI. And NOI is so extremely important. Even though sellers file tax returns, you have to be able to read those tax returns and see that they fit the market, because sellers are looking for deductions, and sellers make mistakes on their own expense statement because they're trying to get a deduction. And if you've got a deduction, that's going to take away from your income, which is going to reduce your NOI, which reduces your cap rate. So it can make you have a not so good looking deal if it's not done correctly. So let's add Ed to the broadcast. Hello, Ed.
How are you today, Chuck?
Good. How's the doctor doing?
The doctor's in the house. He's out of the operating room, and he's ready to give prescriptions to anyone that needs to get help.
Okay, now this is Ed Berlinski, as I put on the screen. He is the doctor of real estate. And so I'm going to drop that down. And Ed, tell us a little bit about yourself. And so we can rely on your diagnosis. I guarantee you we can rely on that.
Well, thank you so much, Chuck. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I guess in terms of just a rough background of my own history, I'm a broker here in Southern California, Los Angeles area, to be specific. And in addition to being a commercial broker, I belong to a couple national organizations that are very prominent, and I think maybe the two strongest organizations in the country. The first being the Society of Exchange Counselors, and the second being the National Council of Exchangers. And along the way, one of the things that I've done is to begin doing private lending business, where basically I lend money to people who fix and flip houses, or for those that aren't familiar with that term, people who buy a home that's dilapidated, if you will, in need of repair, who buy that home, fix it up, and then sell it at a higher price than they bought it for. And it's a short-term situation. And over the last 22, 23 years, I've done a number of those as well.
That's good, Ed. You got an MBA, and so I mean, you understand fully what we're talking about today and how important net operating income is.
It is very important, and it's something that I think, quite frankly, a number of brokers, even commercial brokers, sort of gloss over, and who, aren't fully aware of just the background of, number one, what net operating is, and what that word capitalizing means. That is, you and I know that if we go to purchase property, one of the first questions we ask is, what is the cap rate? And the formula for a cap rate is, or rate of return on that asset, is the amount of net operating earnings, which you're going to talk about in a minute, dividing by the price of that property. And in our capitalistic society, the cap rate or capitalization rate is really the rate at which we value a stream of income. If you are anticipating an investment that has a net operating income of $200,000, how do you value that? If it's $200,000 this year, $200,000 next year, $200,000 the following year, how do you decide what you're going to place the value of that property to be? And again, without sidestepping the net operating income issue, it's that capitalizing or converting a income stream to a today's value that becomes such a very important item when we're doing the business that we do, the commercial real estate investment business.
That is so true. And the reason you want to find out what that property is going to do for the next 4 or 5 years is to get a good rate, a good indication of how that rate can fluctuate. And I have a program that I use that I can run it out 20 years and I can have any combination of scenarios that I want. And I can tell exactly from that program if the rent goes up $5 or down $5, or I spend $50,000 on repairs. I can tell it exactly where my cap rate's going to wind up at when I sell the property. And like you said in the beginning, if you gloss over the most important starting point, then your whole analysis for the next 5 years is off because you started wrong. So you have to start correct.
That's
and
correct.
So that's what we want to do today, is kind of unpack this net operating income, or unpack the APOD, the annual property operating data sheet, which is so important. And let me just put that up on the screen, and I'll share that, and I'm going to make it solo. And can you see that, Ed?
Yes, I can.
And let's just dive into that. Is that all right?
Let's jump in.
The gross income, of course, that's just the number of units you got times what you think the market rate is. And the interesting thing about the market rate is it can change from block to block and neighborhood to neighborhood, depending on the quality, the location, the age, and the amenities of the property. So most brokers just say, oh, for a 2-bedroom, it's worth about $595 or $895. For a 1-bedroom, it's $400 a month. And there you've already started wrong. And so what I've done with this APOD, I broke it down into 5 sections. And 2 of those sections have to be true. And if they're not true, your whole analysis is just off. It's not good at all because you started wrong. And so gross income, do you agree that that's just times the number of units you got?
That's correct.
And it can be anywhere depending on your expertise and your availability of data. And the next one is really a fun one because people say, well, I can get the tax returns from the seller and the seller doesn't lie to the IRS. Well, he may not lie to the IRS, but there's things that you can do to the APOD that will change your net operating income, and it could be good or bad, depending on which side of the transaction you're on. But other income, I've seen brokers not add the laundry income in, but they take it out as an expense. Same with HOA and utilities. So Ed, can you give me your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it goes back to the suggestion for all investors and for all brokers who may be involved in that listing presentation with a person who wants to sell their multifamily home, that it's absolutely critical that you attack every line item of the APOD, because unless you do, you can end up generating numbers for the return on that asset that might be much higher than they should be, and in a few cases could be even lower than they should be. What you're just starting to dive into, Chuck, is a line item by line item evaluation of the type of questions and the type of issues which surround every single line item in that APOD.
That's right. And if I get down into the middle of the expense statement and it's got an expense for laundry cost, and I don't see anything in the income that shows that they produced $10,000 a year from the machines in the laundry, then you start to question that. And basically what we're trying to do is measure the performance of this property just like you would a stock or anything else. You want to know what the property will actually do. And I'll give you an example. One time I saw on an expense statement, the guy had a $9,000 phone bill. I mean, can you imagine that running a 40-unit apartment complex, you'd have a $9,000 phone bill? Well, it's just impossible to attribute all of that $9,000 to the property. And what that did to his net operating income, which affected his cap rate, is when you got an expense like that, it's going to lower your net operating income, which is going to lower your cap rate. And that's not going to look good. You might have been trying to sell a 7 cap rate and you're telling people you got a 5 cap rate. And so you're just shooting yourself in the foot when you don't tell the truth. So is that about right, Ed?
That's right. And again, I think given the experience you've had over the years, Chuck, you're in a strong position to suggest to people that there are, I guess I would call it, hidden stories behind so many of these line items, stories that you've heard before and some that you haven't heard yet. But there are a number of interesting stories which can have a massive effect on on the valuation of that asset.
It can. And you know, you think, well, I got lots of expenses, so I've got lots of deductions, but they're not in there. They're not needed to run the property. And all we want to know is how strong this property is. What is the health of it? Is it working right? Is it good for the market that it's in? And so when you distort the figures, you distort the whole thing. Now, here's another one, Ed, the vacancy in credit. That is, let's see, how do I do that? Okay, vacancy in credit. Now, this one, we said that out of 5 things, that 2 of those things have to be true. And let me tell you, vacancy factor, I don't think I've ever seen it true. I've seen it fairly close. I've seen it accurate for that property, but vacancy factor can be way off. And most brokers just say, oh, the vacancy in this area is about 8% or 5%. Or I love it when the seller says, I have never had a vacancy factor. I'm 100% full 100% of the time. Well, I guarantee you that is not true. You're not that way, because over an analysis over a 5-year period, I guarantee you that you're going to have some vacancy. You're going to have a credit loss, which means somebody didn't pay you or you got stiffed in some way. And we're still come back to we're measuring this property. So what do you think about vacancy, Ed?
Well, I agree with you when, occasionally you and I attend these marketing sessions and we see dozens and dozens of P&Ls on various properties that are being offered for sale. And I think you can confirm that time and time again, we see examples of people who are assuming that effective gross income is the same as gross income. And in effect, right, meaning that don't worry, no vacancies here. It's a strong market. And unless you realize the importance of vacancy, because what you're doing is you're taking dollars off the top. You're taking dollars off the top of your net NOI, so that for every dollar that you overstate, you're overstating that net operating income and, again, distorting the value of what you have.
Yeah, you're definitely distorting the value. And I think that, when you distort that value and you're trying to get somebody to buy your investment, that it makes a huge difference, because not only you didn't do it intentionally, but you're not telling them exactly what it's going to be. And they're going to be upset when they get on the other side of the transaction and it's not what you told them it's going to be. So it has to be true, dollar for dollar.
Absolutely.
All right, Ed. What now? Effective gross, you mentioned that, and that has to be true. That's correct, right?
That's an important number.
Yeah, effective gross, because everything below effective gross is expenses, and expenses come out of effective gross. Now, let's say that if your effective is not right, then everything else below that is wrong, which your NOI is wrong. So you got to start with something that's true, and then you got to go line by line out of your expense statement to be sure that things are not only reasonable, but they were an actual deduction because of expenses and operating cost. So go ahead, Ed, help me out here.
Well, I think the next section of your APOD is the big section of operating expenses themselves. And I think, again, I shake my head a little bit, but I know you and I have talked to clients who basically have tended to show you what they feel is their net operating income. And as you look down the list of expenses, you see there interest expense, or you see there in their list depreciation expense. And then they come down to a number that they claim is net operating income. And as we both know, those two items in particular, interest expense or financing cost really, and depreciation, are both not and never included in operating expenses. The only items shown in operating expenses are the very expenses that the owner is incurring that basically allow him to operate this particular entity. And so again, operating expenses exclude interest cost. Operating expenses include depreciation, just operating costs.
That is so true. And I see APODs or expense statements that come across my desk that have interest deduction in there. They call it interest deduction or mortgage interest, and that can be $6,000 or $8,000 or $10,000. And what that actually does is up your expenses, which reduces your net operating income. And when you divide that by the price or the cap rate, you're going to get a figure that may, if you're the seller, that's going to cost you money. In other words, you're going to leave money on the table. So that's why you'd always never put in depreciation and interest deduction, because it has nothing to do with running that piece of property. And we're measuring the property.
Right. And I think, too, I know I've had a number of beginners, if you will, who are just getting involved in real estate investing and ask the question, which I'm sure you've been asked as well, which is, why do you always talk about net operating income? Why don't you, why isn't after-tax income what you should be looking at? Or why isn't pre-tax income what you should be looking at? Or why isn't cash-on-cash income what you should be talking about? And as we both know, the reason is because we want to get a valuation of the expenses of the property that are exclusive of the differences that there might be with different buyers. There may, if a multi-billionaire comes to buy this property, well, he can get a 50-year loan at 3.5%. But if you and I buy this property, we are going to pay 4.5% or 5% on a 10-year or 20-year loan. Certain buyers might decide to depreciate a particular property. Other buyers are quick flippers, and depreciation isn't even an issue to them. So it's so critical for us to hone in on a definition of income which is going to relate to the rich and the poor and any kind of investor who's going to invest in this property. We're going to be able to say this property delivers this much net operating income no matter who you are.
That's very true. And after-tax income and all that is way below net operating income. It's afterwards. And the thing about NOI, that's where you start. And debt service is a personal problem. It really is. Like you said, the rich don't need it. They'll buy it. And then their NOI and their cash on cash is the same.
Right. And something I didn't mention is that, and I should have mentioned it, is that the difference in tax rates between myself and Warren Buffett is going to be wildly, wildly different. So we don't want to talk about an after-tax return, because on the very same operating information, he is going to get a return which is dramatically different than my return, only because he's a very wealthy person and his tax rate is so different from my tax rate.
That's right. And so you just can't go that way, because since NOI is the base and everything after that is measuring your ability. Like if you're a rich person, like you said, you're going to have a different cap rate. You're going to have a different tax rate, and you're going to approach the property totally different. And so those things are to the individual and not to the property. And we're measuring the property.
Correct.
And that NOI has nothing to do with the accounting measures that are on the next sheet. And so you've got the reason you measure the NOI is because it's true for everybody, because you're measuring the property and not the individual.
That's correct.
So I agree with you fully that we see, even in our meetings, we see things that potential income, I mean, that's anybody's guess. What I would like to see is that people present us the true facts. If you run a property for 10 or 15 or 20 years, I guarantee you've got the income and expenses. And potential, I've always been told that potential belongs to the person that develops it, which is the buyer. And so if you run your property poorly and your expenses are high, your management is poor, then you're going to have a bad NOI, and the NOI is measuring the property, and the opportunity for the buyer is to come in and change some of those things that you wouldn't change. And so that's why this is so important that you start out true.
Absolutely.
And so the Dr. Ed agrees with the diagnosis that when you're going to go
just
over.
Just 1 second, let me get a feeling here.
Now,
yes, it's okay.
We need to take that stethoscope out and do what we call a forensic analysis.
There you go.
Of the NOI.
There you go, Chuck.
If your NOI is off, I mean, your whole thing is garbage. Even the banks will look at it and say, wow, this cannot be true. And they have their guidelines they're going to go by.
Absolutely. Just one moment, Chuck. I'll be right with you.
Okay. So your net operating income has to be as true as possible, and you have to have accurate expenses to be able to do it. And don't put your car insurance in the expenses. Don't put your telephone bills in your expenses, or your kids' expenses in your operating statement. And do not ever put depreciation and mortgage interest deductions in the annual property operating data sheet, because your NOI has to be true. So Dr. Ed is back. And I think that NOI is a reflection of the age, the quality, and the location of the property. So go ahead, Ed.
I'm not sure where you're going to head after this, Chuck, or what you'd planned to do. We got down to net operating income, and of course we might just reiterate or repeat one more time that once you've calculated a good solid net operating income number that you can substantiate to people who are going to be approaching you to buy your property, that is just so closely hooked into a cap rate or capitalization rate. And again, I don't know how many times, I guess I've seen someone marketing a property, and before they say hello, how are you, they say, what's the cap rate? And
That's exactly right.
it's such a universal index that it is something that people rely on. And again, repeating that the cap rate is simply nothing more than the net operating income divided by the price of the property. And again, many people will have goals. Many people will have rates of return which are minimal rates of return that they feel they simply must receive on their investments. And the way they talk about that is that I need a 7 cap, I need an 8 cap, I need a 10 cap, a 7 or 8 or 10% return on the property that I acquire. And so it's all tied in to valuation, and which is the basis or the foundation of how we begin to talk about how excellent or not excellent a return a property has.
That's right. And let me put this up on the screen. And there is the formula, if anybody wants that formula. And you're welcome to use that. It's called the IRV formula, IRV. And so it's only as good as your projection or your figures are. And that's all it is. Now, let me say something about the expense statement. If you're a seller and you've added in depreciation and mortgage interest deductions and some of that, then you're hurting your sale. Your sale price is going to be lower. If you're a buyer and you're looking at their expense statement that they furnished you, and I've had these furnished to me, then these people are going to get a bargain because you put expenses in your expense statement to arrive at your NOI, to arrive at your cap rate that is untrue. So you have to be very, very potential. Now, let me drop this down, and Corinder Singh, she's going to come into the broadcast. So 2, 1, and here's Corinder. Hello, Corinder. How are you? We're talking about net operating income and we're talking about selling commercial property that has an income stream and how that the income and the expenses must be true.
Can Corinder tell us a little bit about himself?
Yes, Corinder, can you tell us a little about yourself?
I'm a full-time. I'm in London. I'm a full-time. I know in the beginning, on time. I knew 3 nights not evening. I knew any other platform that are out.
There seems to be a bit of a problem in terms of transmission.
I'm sorry, Corinder, but I can't hear that. It's not quite loud enough for me.
Does he have earbuds, possibly?
I think he probably does.
If he can insert some earbuds, maybe his the voice will be clearer if you have them.
Yeah, I have earbuds in my ear.
Oh, you got them in your ear. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. But what we were talking about is the net operating income, how it has to be true. And I'm not sure what country you're from, Corinder. Where are you from? You live in India, don't you?
No, London.
Oh, you live in London. And so Corinder is joining us from London.
That's wonderful, Corinder. It's so nice to have you.
That is amazing that we can have a show and somebody from London can come on the show. And I'm sure that investing in property and trying to make money off of your investments in London is probably not that much different than from in the US.
Yeah, it is. Like, it's very, very more popular market than anyone else.
So it's a very good market over there, huh? Yeah, and
Yeah.
your dollar is worth what, about $1.24 to ours, and so I can imagine that a multi-unit apartment complex could be quite expensive.
Oh yeah. It has it very much lightning. Yeah.
Very hard to buy that, huh?
Very.
Yeah. Now here in the U.S., we sell a lot of multifamily properties, and people rely on what's called a capitalization rate to determine if the value is good or not. If it's above what you're paying for your money, then the further it gets away from, if you're paying 4% and you can generate 7 or 8%, then you're good. You're making money. So it's a hard thing investing.
And just to catch
Oh
a little bit, Corinda, I hope I'm pronouncing your name okay. What
yeah.
we really have just reviewed is the structure of how we look at return on a property, how we look at basically the return on that investment. And we went through the pieces of that process, the first being what revenues you can generate from the asset, and the second being what the expenses of that property are. There are various expenses which are operating expenses, which do not include interest expense, do not include depreciation, but only the items which basically are incurred by running that property. Things like management, things like electric, things like maintenance, things like repairs, things like accounting expenses and others, which every investor will have to incur when they buy that asset. And the
Oh yeah.
result, if
Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah. That is most important in life. Nothing else. Only that is most important thing in life.
right, right. And the result of subtracting those operating expenses from the income which you can get on that property, and usually most of that income is rental income from the people who pay rent, but there are other types of income, such as laundry income, if you happen to run a laundry at the property, or sometimes they have storage units which they will sell to a tenant or rent to a tenant on a monthly basis, which add to the income of the basic rent. But the very simple answer to what are the operating expenses subtracted from the income is that phrase or that category or that item that we have been explaining and discussing, which is net operating income.
Yeah.
Yeah, net
I mean,
operating
like,
income. Go ahead, Corinda.
I was gonna say, like in England, we have pounds. Like in the US, it's dollars, and in Australia, I don't know what they use, but in England, there is pounds. And I don't know about America. I don't know about America, what America does, but in our country, we have more investment.
Now, did you say there's a lot of investments in your country?
Yeah,
Yeah, that would always be very interesting to be able to go over to London and see just what it is takes to invest in rental property, investment property. Have you ever done that, Ed?
Have I ever done what?
Invested in London or England or overseas?
No, I haven't. All my and again, I'm primarily a lender rather than investor, but I've always kept my my assets here in the United States.
Yeah.
Corinda, do you have other friends of yours in London that might be interested in real estate investing?
yeah. I don't know if you know Stephen. He always,
Stephen Healy?
Yeah. And Aaron, RJ, Adam.
Corinda knows people in Wiltshire, England, and that's Stephen Healy. And R.J.
Yeah.
Redden, I'm not sure where R.J.'s from, and several people in Australia. And he's always on a broadcast with these people.
Like Daisy, Adam, Molly, Joe, all of the other countries. Not just England, but other countries.
In other countries.
Mm.
So, Ed, we were wondering where people would come from when they joined our broadcast, and that's amazing that Corinda is from London. So,
yes, and I think it's important, Corinda, to repeat something that Chuck and I have spoken about numerous times, and that is that a lot of the techniques which Chuck and I will be talking about in the future are techniques which you can utilize whether you happen to be in UK or France or South America or Asia or anywhere in the world, because they're not all dependent upon the U.S. tax system. They're fundamental principles of investing that basically will work anywhere. Is that right, Chuck?
yes, I think that's a very good point, Ed, that you brought that up. Everything that we have discussed today stands on its own, no matter what country you're in. The fundamentals of investment, real estate, and making a return on your money. And so if you've got a cash flow, we can measure that return. And so if you're got money coming in, we can definitely measure it anywhere in the world.
Oh, yeah. That is true. Very, very, very true.
Okay. Have you got any questions?
I just want to know where I can find you.
Oh, where you can, well, Ed is edberlinski@gmail.com. And mine is chuck@montrosecommercial.com.
And the spelling of my email is edberlinski@gmail.com.
Yeah, Ed Berlinski.
Yeah. So, just on the rock today.
Now, Ed and I
Mm.
belong to a couple of groups, and there's people in our groups that deal internationally. They deal all over the world. So Yeah, it's pretty powerful groups that Ed and I are in.
I have to just mention to you, Chuck, I've got to sign off in a couple of minutes. I just have something I've got to run out to, but I didn't want to cut it too short. But I will have to bow out pretty soon.
Okay, well, that's about all I have, Ed, Dr. Ed.
Yes, I'm a doctor. You can see my. This is not really a doctor, but I call myself a real estate doctor. I think he might have left, possibly. Corinda might have left us.
You're frozen. He's frozen up.
He's frozen. Yeah, I think he may have passed off.
Yeah.
Okay, he passed on and went.
Well, we've got our first international viewer.
That is so awesome, and Corinda is a nice guy, and I see him quite often on other shows.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah.
Oh, do you?
Okay, let's see. Corinda, I'm going to put him back up so he can say bye because he refreshed his screen. And so, Corinda, we're so glad you joined.
Yeah, so, I see you next week. Or will it be on the page?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We're going to try to keep this going.
Very nice to meet you, sir. Very nice to meet you.
Yeah, very nice to meet you. We're glad you joined our show. It just made it fun. And so we're going to sign off, Corinda.
Have a good day.
Have a good day. Okay, Ed, I'm going to sign you off, and then I'm going to sign off. And
you look great, by the way. You look like you've been working out 7 days a week or something.
Well, I only had one ice cream cone today, so maybe I'm losing a little weight.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Ed, and I'll send you out a replay of this.
This will be great. Thanks so much, Chuck.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, that was Ed from Los Angeles and Corinda from London. And so that was quite awesome to have Corinda show up. It just makes us feel good that somebody would like to join our broadcast. And today we talked about net operating income and how important it was. And so Ed and I hope to keep this going on investing the common sense way in real estate or other assets. I mean, we trade motorhomes and houses for cars and cars for houses and land for buildings, and we add cash. And Ed's a hard money lender, so he loans money. I don't know exactly where all he will go, but he will definitely loan money if the deal is constructed correctly. And that starts with your income and your expenses. And so don't give potential income, give actual income and expenses all the time. And then if you want to tell me what you think the potential is, then give me your potential income statement. And then I might even ask you to guarantee the income because I may not quite agree with your analysis. So that's it for Investment Tuesday. And thanks for watching. We really appreciate it.